A Chevrolet truck can look like the deal of your life right up until it drains your bank account with a problem the seller forgot to mention. And the worst part is, some of these trucks don't fail in dramatic movie scene fashion at first. They fail slowly, quietly, and expensively, until you wake up one day realizing you didn't buy a truck. You bought a monthly repair subscription. So let me ask you this right now before we go any further. Have you ever owned a Chevy truck that seemed solid on the test drive, but turned into a nightmare after a few months? Drop your year and model in the comments, because I guarantee you somebody watching this is about to make the same mistake you already survived. If you're shopping used trucks, this is exactly where people get trapped. You see a Silverado or Colorado sitting there with aggressive tires, a clean interior, maybe a lift kit, maybe an aftermarket exhaust, and your brain starts telling you this thing is tough, proven, and ready to work. That is how buyers get emotionally hooked before they ever look at the service history, the transmission behavior, or the engine design. And here's the scary part. Some of the worst Chevrolet trucks don't look bad at all. They look like a great deal. That's what makes them dangerous. Anybody can spot a truck with rust through the cab corners and a transmission slipping into oblivion. The trucks you really need to fear are the ones that idle smoothly for 10 minutes, shift okay on a short drive, and then start revealing their real personality after you sign the papers. That's when you discover the hidden oil consumption, the cylinder deactivation headaches, the torque converter shudder, the lifter failures, or the kind of electrical and HVAC nonsense that doesn't total the truck but slowly bleeds you dry. And once you're in that position, you start doing that thing every regretful buyer does, where you tell yourself, maybe it's just a sensor. Maybe it just needs a fluid change. Maybe I'm overthinking it. But here's the truth you need to hear. When a truck has a reputation for a specific, expensive failure, hoping yours is the magical good one is not a strategy. It's a gamble with truck-sized consequences. One of the biggest traps wearing a gold bow tie is the 2007 through 2011 Chevrolet Silverado 1500, and honestly, the related Chevrolet Avalanche years deserve to be standing right next to it in this warning. On the surface, these trucks are easy to love. They look tough. Parts are everywhere. And the 5.3 seems like one of those engines you should be able to run forever. That's exactly why so many people let their guard down. But buried in GM's own service information were bulletins addressing oil consumption in certain AFM-equipped V8 trucks and SUVs, with complaints that could include rough running, a service engine light, and oil use high enough to trigger serious concern. The bulletin specifically discussed oil being pulled through the PCV system or sprayed from the AFM pressure relief valve, which could contribute to deposits and excessive oil consumption, and it referenced complaints showing up around 30,000 to 40,000 miles in some cases. Now think about how brutal that is for a used truck buyer. You buy what looks like a normal Silverado, maybe it has 90,000 miles, maybe the owner says it uses a little oil, but that's normal, and you think no big deal. Then you realize you're adding oil between changes, the plugs start fouling, it misfires under load, and suddenly your reliable old Chevy has become that truck you can't fully trust on a road trip with a trailer or even on your work commute. And it gets worse because a lot of buyers don't realize the real damage isn't only the inconvenience of topping off oil. The real damage is what happens when a low oil event or a long-running consumption problem starts stacking wear on top of wear. Then you're talking about deeper engine work, maybe lifters, maybe cam wear, maybe piston ring cleaning attempts that don't really restore your confidence. That cheap Silverado starts getting expensive fast, and if you bought it because it was the budget option, that's the exact opposite of what you needed. And this is where people make the first really costly mistake. They confuse popularity with safety. Just because a truck sold in massive numbers does not mean every version is a smart buy. In fact, sometimes it means the opposite. A hugely popular truck with a known defect creates a giant pool of used examples, which means the market is flooded with vehicles that have either already developed the problem, are about to develop the problem, or have been patched up just enough to get passed along to the next owner. You know the kind of listing I'm talking about. Fresh oil change, new plugs, runs great, cold AC, clean title. Maybe all true, at least for today. But if that truck came from one of those oil-hungry AFM years, that simple listing can be hiding a story you will only understand after a few months of ownership. And the emotional part of this matters, because you don't just lose money when a truck like that goes bad. You lose trust. You stop wanting to drive it far. You start listening for every tick. Every startup becomes a little anxiety test. Every parking spot leaves you glancing down for drips. And once a truck gets into your head like that, it doesn't matter how good it looks sitting in the driveway. It's no longer a machine you rely on. It's a machine you manage. That is not what most people think they're buying when they say they want a Chevy truck. They think they're buying durability, simple maintenance, and years of dependable use. What they're actually buying, in some of these years, is uncertainty disguised as tradition. And if you're shopping on a budget, uncertainty is the one thing you absolutely cannot afford. Then you get to another sneaky danger zone, the 2014 Chevrolet Silverado 1500, especially if you're the kind of buyer who gets tempted by a first-year redesign because it looks newer than it is. This is one of those trucks that can absolutely trick you. New body, modern interior, strong road presence, and you start thinking you're getting a more updated truck without paying new truck money. But first-year redesigns can be brutally deceptive because that's when all the little bugs, supplier issues, and weak points start revealing themselves in the real world. One of the big headaches owners have reported on these trucks is AC failure. And once you've owned a truck with a failed AC condenser or leak issue, you know how irritating that becomes. It's not just about comfort. It's about what repeated small failures tell you about the overall ownership experience. Because that's how bad trucks break you down psychologically. Not always with one giant failure. Sometimes with a pattern of dumb, annoying, recurring failures that keep asking for another few $100, then another, then another. And when a truck starts building that pattern, you begin to notice something ugly. The vehicle is no longer working for you. You're working for it. A lot of buyers can tolerate one big repair if the truck is otherwise solid. What they can't tolerate is the death by 1,000 cuts ownership experience where every season seems to bring a new surprise. Summer, AC leak, winter, strange shift quality, spring, electrical weirdness, fall, random warning lights. That kind of truck destroys your budget because none of the repairs sound catastrophic by themselves, but the total cost over 2 or 3 years becomes ridiculous. And when you go to sell it, guess what happens? The next buyer notices the issues, or the market already knows the reputation, and suddenly the resale value you were counting on isn't there. So now you've paid to own the headache and you still lose on the back end. That is the kind of trap that makes a truck worth avoiding, even if it looks great in photos. And here's the part most buyers never think about until it's too late. Modern used trucks don't have to be completely broken to be a terrible purchase. They only have to be unreliable enough to ruin your plans. If your truck randomly shakes, burns oil, drops AC performance, or throws a misfire once in a while, you might still drive it every day. That's what makes these problem years so dangerous. They remain usable just long enough for you to justify keeping them. You start negotiating with the truck. It only does it when it's cold. It only shakes under light throttle. It only used a quart this month. That mental negotiation is exactly how owners stay trapped, and sellers know it. A seller doesn't need the truck to be perfect. He just needs it to behave for 20 minutes. He just needs it to start, idle, and not explode on your test drive. Meanwhile, the deeper pattern is waiting for you after the title changes hands. That's why if you're looking at any Chevy truck with one of these known reputation years, you have to stop thinking like a hopeful buyer and start thinking like an investigator. Why are they selling it? Has the transmission fluid ever been exchanged properly? Has the engine had lifter work? Is there a pattern of misfire codes? Are there oil consumption notes in the maintenance history? Has the AC system already been repaired once, twice, or never? Because the absence of receipts is not neutral. On problem trucks, the absence of receipts is a warning label. Now let's talk about the first-generation new body Colorado trap, because the 2015 Chevrolet Colorado is exactly the kind of truck that attracts buyers who want mid-size practicality without full-size expenses. On paper, that makes total sense. The truck looks modern, it feels easier to live with, and a lot of buyers assume smaller automatically means cheaper and safer. But first-year mid-size redesigns can be just as risky as full-size trucks, and owner complaint data on the 2015 Colorado shows a pattern of transmission-related complaints ranging from sluggish behavior and improper shifting to no forward gears in some reports. That should get your attention immediately because transmission weirdness is one of the fastest ways for a good deal to become a regret story. A truck doesn't need a full transmission explosion to be a bad buy. If it hesitates when you need power, hunts between gears, won't downshift when you merge, or feels confused in traffic, that truck is already failing at one of its most basic jobs. And the worst part is, those symptoms often create doubt before they create proof. You feel the hesitation. You notice the weird shift. But if no warning light is on and the seller says, "That's just how these drive," you can start second-guessing yourself. Please don't do that. If a truck feels wrong, especially a known problem year, assume your instincts are trying to save you money. Too many buyers talk themselves out of what the truck is clearly telling them. Then a few weeks later, they're sitting at a dealer or transmission shop, hearing words like reprogramming, valve body, torque converter, adaptation reset, internal fault, or full replacement. And every one of those words sounds expensive for a reason. The 2015 Colorado is especially dangerous because it sells the image of sensible truck ownership. You think you're avoiding the big truck maintenance hit, but if you land a problem example, you can still get nailed with the kind of repair bills that make no financial sense on a mid-size pickup. That is the nightmare. Not just that it breaks, but that the repair cost feels wildly out of proportion to what you thought you were buying. And if you think the Colorado story calms down after that, here's the scary part. It doesn't necessarily, because once you move into the later trucks tied to the infamous shudder complaints, things get even more frustrating. GM issued bulletins describing a shake or shudder during light throttle acceleration between roughly 25 and 80 miles per hour, sometimes described as feeling like driving over rumble strips. And if you've ever felt that in a truck, you know how unsettling it is. It's one of those sensations that makes you instantly wonder whether the problem is the road, the tires, the drive shaft, the differential, the transmission, or all of the above. That uncertainty is part of what makes shudder issues so maddening. And the official response in these cases often involved specific fluid exchange procedures, with the note that it could take up to 200 miles and multiple drive cycles for the shudder condition to be eliminated. Think about how unsettling that ownership experience is for you as a buyer. Your truck is shaking in a way that feels wrong, but the path to fixing it is not always quick, simple, or guaranteed to restore confidence. Sometimes the fix helps, sometimes it comes back. Sometimes owners end up paying for repeated attempts. That is not the kind of truck you want to buy if your goal is predictable ownership. And because these problems don't always announce themselves loudly, a lot of bad trucks pass the used market inspection game. That's what you really have to understand. A seller can clear codes. A fresh fluid service can temporarily improve feel. A dealership can say, "No problem found," if the issue doesn't appear during a brief visit. Meanwhile, you are the one who ends up living with the truck in real weather, real traffic, real towing, and real stop-and-go commuting, where the symptoms actually show themselves. That's when you discover the shift flare, the odd downshift, the highway rumble strip vibration, or the hesitation that makes the truck feel like it's thinking instead of working. And that's why the 2017 through 2019 range on certain Chevrolet trucks scares experienced buyers more than it scares first-time buyers. First-time buyers see a newer truck. Experienced buyers hear 8-speed and immediately start asking harder questions. Has it shuddered before? Was the fluid updated to the correct spec? Did it get one flush or multiple visits? Is the torque converter still original? Because if you don't know those answers, you are stepping into someone else's unfinished story. And unfinished mechanical stories are expensive. You might get lucky and land a good one. But if you're shopping in the never buy conversation, luck is exactly what you're trying to remove from the equation. Quick pause, because if this video saves you from buying one bad truck, one bad engine, or one bad transmission, do me a favor and hit like and subscribe. Seriously, this channel is for people who don't want to learn expensive lessons the hard way. If you want to keep your money in your wallet instead of feeding it to repair shops, subscribe now, because there are a lot more vehicles out there pretending to be reliable than most buyers realize. Now let's go to one of the ugliest modern Chevrolet truck stories, and that's lifter failure on newer Silverado V8s. This is where the truck market gets really cruel, because newer usually means more expensive, and more expensive means buyers assume the engineering must be better. But GM bulletins covering certain 5.3 and 6.2 V8 applications described engine misfire or tick noise complaints, sometimes with a PRO300 code, and listed failure modes like an AFM lifter that is mechanically collapsed or stuck, a lifter stuck in the bore, or even a bent push rod. Let that sink in. You buy a relatively modern Silverado because you want something nicer, quieter, and more advanced, and now you're reading about collapsed lifters and bent push rods. That is not small stuff. That is the kind of language that turns a late-model truck into a serious mechanical risk. And it gets worse because when valve train problems show up, they attack the exact reason most people buy a truck with a V8 in the first place: confidence. You want that engine to feel solid, effortless, and durable. The second you start hearing a tick, feeling a misfire, or seeing that engine light tied to internal lifter concerns, all of that confidence disappears. Suddenly, every cold start makes you tense. Every towing trip becomes a question mark. Every extended warranty pitch starts sounding less like a scam and more like a survival tool. That is a brutal place to be when you've already spent real money to step into a newer truck. And newer examples got their own version of the same nightmare. In a GM Preliminary Information Bulletin covering certain 2020 and 2021 Silverado 1500 trucks with the 5.3 and 6.2, the condition described could involve bent push rods leading to collapsed lifters or even lifters that came apart, with repair guidance calling for lifter and guide replacement depending on mileage and production window. Now, you don't need to be a master mechanic to understand why that should make you nervous. When a manufacturer is issuing repair guidance about replacing all lifters and guides on both banks in some cases, you're no longer talking about a random squeak or an isolated annoyance. You're talking about a major internal engine ownership risk. And here's what makes this so dangerous in the used market. A truck can be traded in right after the repair or right before the failure, and from the outside, you may have no idea which situation you're looking at. One truck may already have had the work done correctly and be okay. Another may be a time bomb that just hasn't started talking yet. That's why I keep saying the word dangerous, not because every single truck will fail, but because the downside is expensive enough that if you can't verify history, the risk-reward math becomes terrible for you. You are the one putting cash on the line. You are the one inheriting uncertainty. And once you're making payments on uncertainty, you've already lost the negotiation. Now let's turn that tension up even further, because if you think the newest trucks are automatically the safest bet, that belief can cost you a fortune. NHTSA Recall 25V274 covers certain 2021 through 2024 Chevrolet Silverado 1500 trucks equipped with the 6.2-liter L87 V8. Along with related GM SUVs, and the defect description is the kind of language no truck shopper wants to read. Connecting rod and/or crankshaft components may have manufacturing defects that can lead to engine damage and engine failure, with loss of propulsion increasing crash risk. That is not a cute little ownership quirk. That is a serious engine-level problem on expensive, relatively new vehicles. And this is where the used market becomes absolutely brutal. Because somebody shopping a lightly used Silverado 1500 with a 6.2 is often doing it specifically to get premium power without paying full new truck price. Sounds smart, right? But here's the trap. When a premium engine carries a major defect or recall history, the savings you thought you found can evaporate instantly if the truck hasn't been properly inspected, repaired, documented, or if the engine's history remains unclear. You don't want to be the person who buys a great deal on a loaded Silverado High Country or trail-ready trim only to discover that the most expensive part of the truck is exactly the part under suspicion. That is upside-down ownership at its worst. You paid extra for the nicer engine, and the nicer engine became the risk. And let me tell you where buyers really get burned on trucks like these. Ego. Not in a mean way, just in a human way. You want the nice one. You want the V8. You want the one with the bigger wheels, better seats, louder presence, maybe that one-owner, clean Carfax aura that makes you feel like you found the hidden gem, and dealerships know how to feed that emotion. Nice detail job, aggressive financing pitch. This won't last. These are hard to find. Somebody else is looking at it. All of that pressure pushes you toward the most expensive version of the truck, which means if the drivetrain has a known risk, your loss can be massive. That's why some of the Chevrolet trucks you should never buy are not the obvious, clapped-out, cheap ones. They're the attractive, higher-trim, emotionally irresistible ones with the wrong engine, wrong year, or wrong transmission. Those are the trucks that fool smart people. The ugly, cheap one raises suspicion. The shiny, loaded one lowers it. And that is exactly backwards. There's another ugly layer to all this, and it's the long-term ownership risk that doesn't show up on the day you buy the truck. Even if a problematic Silverado or Colorado isn't currently broken, it may already have the reputation. And reputation matters. It affects resale, insurance conversations, trade-in offers, warranty decisions, and how quickly a shop figures out what it wants to charge you. The minute a vehicle develops a well-known pattern, you lose leverage. The dealer knows. The independent shop knows. The buyer who eventually wants to purchase it from you knows. Suddenly, you're not just fixing the truck, you're defending the truck. You start saying things like, "It's one of the good ones," or "That issue was overblown," or "Mine hasn't done it yet." Notice what all of those phrases have in common. They are hope-based, not evidence-based. And hope is not a maintenance plan. If you have to convince yourself that a known problem truck is secretly safe, you are already standing in the danger zone. So what should you actually do if you're staring at a Chevrolet truck and wondering whether it belongs on your personal never-buy list? First, stop shopping by appearance and trim. Shop by drivetrain history. The engine and transmission matter more than the wheels, the paint, the touchscreen, or whether the seats still smell new. Second, if you're looking at an AFM-era 5.3 Silverado or Avalanche, assume oil consumption is a question that must be answered, not a rumor to ignore. Third, if you're looking at a 2015 Colorado or anything with a history of weird shifting, hesitation, or shudder, do not let anybody tell you they all do that unless you are prepared to pay for that behavior later. Fourth, if you're looking at a newer Silverado V8 and you hear any tick, feel any misfire, or see any records tied to lifter concerns, slow down immediately. And fifth, if you're looking at a 2021 to 2024 6.2 Silverado, verify recall status and documentation with the seriousness of somebody about to bet thousands of dollars, because that is exactly what you're doing. The deeper message here is simple. The wrong Chevy truck can punish you in stages. First with denial, then with inconvenience, then with repair bills, then with regret. And maybe the biggest warning of all is this. The worst Chevrolet trucks usually don't lose you money all at once. They trap you into losing it a little at a time, which is actually more dangerous because that keeps you hanging on. You fix one thing because you've already bought the truck. Then you fix the next thing because you've already fixed the first thing. Then you keep it another year because selling it broken would hurt too much. And before you know it, you've spent enough money trying to make a bad truck behave that you could have bought a better truck in the first place. That is why this topic matters so much. We're not just talking about mechanical issues. We're talking about financial traps disguised as pickup trucks. We're talking about vehicles that can quietly turn your smart buy into a rolling lesson in sunk cost fallacy. And if you've been there before, you know how painful that is, because it's never just the repair bill. It's the towing bill, the lost time, the missed workday, the ruined trip, the stress, the uncertainty, and that terrible feeling when the truck you were proud of starts embarrassing you. So, if you remember nothing else from this video, remember this. Never buy a Chevrolet truck just because it looks tough, sounds good, or seems cheap for the year. Some of the worst ones on the market are hiding behind clean paint, strong marketing, and a reputation that belongs to better years. The real question is not whether a Chevy truck can be good. Plenty of them can. The real question is whether you are about to buy one of the years that can quietly wreck your budget after the honeymoon ends. And if you ignore the warning signs on these Silverado, Avalanche, Colorado, and newer V8 problem zones, you may not find out you made a mistake until the repair estimate is already in your hand. That's why urgency matters. The bad purchase doesn't happen when the engine fails. It happens when you say yes to the truck without doing the homework. Stay sharp, keep asking hard questions, and never let a clean test drive talk you out of a dirty reputation, because the truck you almost buy can be the one that saves you the most money. And if you want to avoid more vehicles that can wreck your wallet, watch the next video right now, because there are plenty more great deals out there just waiting to become somebody's expensive mistake.